Having fled from her husband, the woman took only the will. The husband merely smirked while the mother-in-law rejoiced. That was until the mother-in-law happened to overhear the neighbor's conversation. Alberto had always known his fate in advance. He would be buried here, at the edge of the world, in the village of Caleras, a seismic zone. The tsunami visits as if it owns the place, whenever it pleases. And on top of that, two volcanoes sit right next door. Alberto had lived through that eruption which struck their small settlement in 2010, courtesy of those fiery neighbors. As soon as the houses were blanketed with ash, the neighbors began packing their things. But he did nothing. He stayed. At his age, it was too late to change anything, and besides, no one was waiting for him back on the mainland. All family ties had long been severed. Sometimes it seemed to him that his own life had blazed and burned just like the Andean volcanoes. But everything passes. Old age has its own rules. He could not leave the grave of his last wife, Carmelita. They had come here together 30 years ago. Together they would rest in the cemetery. It was only fair. Lately, he more and more often felt that the old woman with the scythe was close by. For all his womanizing, for all the many women he had known, he had never fathered children. The verb to father had never sat well with him anyway. Babies weren't cockroaches after all. But as it happened, all three of his official wives answered the same way to his natural questions about heirs to the family name. It's too early for us to have children. Let's live for ourselves first, then we'll see. On his passport, he was Alberto, but all his partners had called him only Albertito. His last wife, Carmelita, even added, "You are my beloved red flower, so handsome, so smart, so attractive that I lose my head the moment I'm beside you." He would joke back, "Carmelita, don't turn me into some idol. What kind of flower am I? I'm sinful, a womanizer marked all over. You know I only stopped at you, settled down with you. Before you, I never passed a single skirt by." Carmelita never listened. She lived for him alone. Deep down, she always understood. He never really chased after women himself. The weaker sex relentlessly pursued him of their own accord, wherever they happened to meet him. First, as a neat-looking sailor, Alberto had served honestly and faithfully for 3 years on a Navy ship in his youth. In the ports, the girls never gave him peace. Then came the correspondence course at the journalism faculty. What romantic verses he would write in passing, scribbled on his knee, and then immediately read aloud to anyone who wished to hear. Not Neruda, of course, but words bent to his will without protest. People like to joke about the Indians. I sing of what I see. Alberto wrote poems about everything that moved him, and beauty always touched him. Whether the yellow moon was shining in the sky, or the wind was roaming through the branches of the trees, or the flower buds were swaying, it all found its way into lines. To each admirer, he would dedicate a word, and the ladies swooned. He could create a romance with any of them in 10 minutes. He made them happy without even thinking about it, playfully. He first married within 2 days, sweeping off the feet of a secretary at one of the editorial offices. Rosario was ready to follow this young man not just into marriage, but to the ends of the earth. Her parents gave them a distant little room in their big apartment. Rosario became pregnant right away. Alberto had not expected her reaction. His young wife, like a madwoman, kept repeating, "It's too early for us to become parents. I want to be with you alone. I don't need a third here. He'll only steal your time away from me." She shouted and made scenes. And then, at a very early stage, she miscarried, as though the child himself had felt his mother did not welcome him. It all ended with complications, while around Alberto surged a sea of ardent female admirers. While Rosario spent time in hospitals, tests, treatments, he could not resist. Rosario's already fragile psyche quickly veered off in the wrong direction, and kind souls were quick to inform her that they had seen Alberto with this one and with that one. She didn't bother to sort things out. She was saved by a miracle. Again, she landed in a hospital bed and was even put on record. Her father-in-law called Alberto out from the young couple's room. At the door stood the son-in-law's suitcase with his meager belongings. "Get out of here quietly before I break all your bones. Forget the road to this house. My cousin works in the registry office. She'll handle the divorce quietly." Don't you dare show yourself around Rosario. I'll tell her you turned out to be scum, that you moved in with another woman and left no address." At that time, Alberto did not know whether he had truly loved Rosario or if it had just been their young, hot-blooded passion sweeping them away. He had never intended to cheat on his wife, at least not yet, but the situation with her pregnancy had utterly baffled him. He was ready for a child, for their continuation together, for settling in the city, for living like other families. His wife's frenzy on this matter struck him to the core. Two people, no matter how much they love one another, cannot remain forever only the two of them. Or was he wrong? Rosario did not listen to his reasoning. She loved him in a sick, consuming way. She grew nervous even if he got out of bed just to drink water, but he began to tire of her relentless attachment. When Rosario lost the child, he felt relief. He himself had already understood. Their marriage had been an immature, rash mistake. Alberto pulled the paper out of the carved box and again marveled at the notice written there. His first wife, Rosario, had left him in her will the large, solid apartment of her parents in central Santiago, the very same one from which his father-in-law had once ordered him out with his belongings. He hadn't known at first that, at Rosario's request, by then already ill, a notary had searched for him for a long time in distant places. She had never remarried, had never been able to have children. After her parents' death, she was left completely alone. She had loved him her whole life. She bore no grudges and carried no hatred. Carmelita was no longer in this world when he learned of all this. He had wanted to refuse Rosario's gift, but her farewell letter stopped him. "My love, accept this apartment from me as a keepsake. It will always be easy to sell. Long ago you gave me so much brief happiness that it was enough for me to live on for the rest of my life. Thank you for having been mine. Forever only yours, Rosario. And I still love you, as before." To claim the inheritance, Alberto had to travel to the capital, just over 500 kilometers from their village. It was troublesome, but Rosario's care touched him deeply. In truth, he no longer needed either the money that could be made from the apartment or the place itself. He paid tribute to Rosario's devotion, her loyalty to him. He very much wished that in that apartment someone else's new family happiness would settle, filled with love, with children's voices, with small human joys. But that was beyond his power. For now he sometimes took that document out of the carved box and surrendered himself to memories of his reckless youth. It was a long time after Rosario before he married again. A whole 10 years he spent roaming freely. He wrote poems and essays for the newspaper again, traveled all over the country on assignments. Alberto had never gone looking for easy paths in relationships. They always found him themselves. One day he had to pay the full price for that. His second wife, Valentina, with her, everything was always on the edge. Valentina was a successful, fashionable sculptor, the owner of her own art gallery, which even housed several genuine masterpieces. Wealthy, confident, ambitious. They met when he was on assignment in Buenos Aires. She noticed him at an exhibition while he was gathering material for an article. She took him home straight away. No one in her circle knew that the black gloves on her hands were not for the sake of some image, some mysterious style. She didn't take them off at home either. Alberto managed to uncover their secret. Valentina was a latent invalid. She had lost parts of several fingers on both hands when she mishandled a complicated tool. A power saw for cutting stone had slipped from her hands and shortened her fingers in several places. The sight was not for the faint-hearted. The deformity that Valentina was so ashamed of did not repel Alberto. He began circling around her, transferred to the Buenos Aires branch of his editorial office. He wanted to be by her side 24 hours a day, never leaving. He believed he was ready to do anything for her without a second thought. Valentina did not need such sacrifices. She rather allowed herself to be loved than loved in return. But for him, it didn't matter. As long as he was near, as long as he was with her. During that time, he even stopped noticing other women at all, walked past them as if they were empty space. Valentina took off her gloves for Alberto only after they were married. Their marriage again resembled a bonfire, though not quite in the same way as with Rosario. Valentina was about 10 years older than her husband. She herself had known many men. For a long time, Alberto had to escort suitors, admirers, would-be lovers of his wife down the stairs. They came to her home like moths to a flame. The trouble was, if he wasn't at home, Valentina might spend her time with a lover on a whim. She would justify herself weakly. Albertito, I'm an artist. I was urgently lacking inspiration, and I got it. Stop sulking. I don't even remember his name. It's nothing, believe me. Alberto loved Valentina with the same painful love with which Rosario had once loved him. He grew insanely jealous. He listened to every sound in her gallery, in their apartment. He truly suffered, while she smiled indulgently. Leave all your suspicions. I am your wife, and everything else is temporary, unserious. He went mad with rage. He couldn't understand how such a thing was possible. And an inner voice whispered, haven't you yourself behaved the same way? The boomerang rule has never been repealed. After each of Valentina's affairs, they quarreled loudly. The whole building could hear. Then they made up passionately. Naturally, Alberto still hinted about children. He would have been happy if the woman he loved gave him a child. But Valentina laughed in his face. Albertito, children. Even though I'm still in childbearing age, I won't even pretend to promise you, let's wait and see. I won't deceive you like that. A mother with such deformed hands, always wearing black gloves, has no place pushing a pram. And it's not only that. There are women who simply aren't made for motherhood. I belong to that breed. They stayed together for 6 years. Then Alberto's patience snapped. After yet another man who had played the role of Valentina's muse, he packed his things and walked out into nowhere. By then, he had long had no ties with his parents or younger sister. They had drifted apart, like ships in the night, even before he had gone away to serve 3 years in the army. Their family could not quite be called marginal. Drinking parents were hardly unusual. With his sister, Alberto's relations had always been rather cold. Just some little brat underfoot, in his view. Why pay her any attention? When Alberto finally disappeared from his parents' home, Fernanda was only 8. Later they met only once more, when he came on leave. His little sister was still twirling her fluffy braid around her finger, staring at her older brother with enormous eyes, drawing paper dolls and then outfits for them. She stayed quiet, endured, did what needed doing. Their father and mother were increasingly lost in drunken stupor, and Fernanda grew up and shouldered all the household burdens. Not a trace of pity stirred in Alberto's heart. The girl was capable. She would manage on her own. He was already spinning in his adventures. What time did he have for family troubles? He was absent when their parents died one after another, when Fernanda, unmarried by some fleeting suitor, gave birth to a daughter and again struggled to survive in the midst of hardships. His sister never sought to contact him, as if offended by his indifference to her fate. Only now in old age did Alberto begin to feel a genuine sense of regret. He was utterly alone like a finger. Once he was gone, no one would place a flower on his grave. No one would weep. No one would remember what he had been like. Just deserts. And what right had he to complain about the peculiar ways his wives had loved him? After his divorce from Valentina, he had dashed off to Lima, to chase away the melancholy, as he put it. He thought he would never again hear of his second wife, but here too a surprise awaited him. Valentina was dead. Recently, already frail, she had been struck by a car. He would never have known of the tragedy if not for another notary who came to find him. Alberto would never have imagined that he had left such a mark on Valentina's memory. This woman's will overturned all his notions of what truly mattered in a relationship. Valentina had left him her entire considerable estate. She had expanded and grown her gallery, preserved rare paintings, cultivated her apartment in Buenos Aires. And once again, there was a farewell letter. Albertito, if you are reading these lines, it means I am no longer in this world. I write them after we parted ways. I am sure that there is no one in my life more capable of properly managing my possessions than you, and never will be. That is why I have decided to make my will here and now. Let it wait for its hour. I want to explain myself to you, my love. Know that I was always afraid to trust you. I loved you, and at the same time feared that I was mistaken. You endured all my antics, while I tested you again and again, proving to myself that I was wanted, desired by other men. I wanted you to fear losing me, to be mine forever. It was a disastrous tactic, but I thought I was winning. I deeply regret all the pain I caused you. You will not return, and you are unlikely to forgive me. For me, you were, are, and will remain the man of my life, the one and only. I love you. Forever yours, Valentina. Alberto had no idea what to do with all these riches Valentina had left him. He was far from art, growing weaker with each passing day, older and older. What sort of owner could he be of all that? He neither knew how nor wished to manage it, so he announced in the notary's office of the capital, where once more he had to fly. But the clerks there had no time for his worries. They handed him the documents, bowed politely, and left him alone with the news. Alberto returned to Caleras. There was no longer Carmelita to consult, no solution to be found. Soon he would leave this earth himself, and all the property would safely pass into the hands of the state. How foolishly he had lived his life. About women, they say in such cases, not a child, not even a kitten. And what would they say of him once it became known that he had died a rich man? Alberto sighed. Indeed, he had not been poor before this either, if one recalled the story of his marriage to his third wife, Carmelita. He had taken her from her family, from her husband, a high-ranking military officer. It was Carmelita herself who had suggested the unthinkable, that they run far, far away together to Caleras. Carmelita was an ace in fish and seafood processing, a born technologist in her field. At a meeting in the capital, where the directors of fish canning plants would sometimes gather, the underperformers were reprimanded and put on notice. One of them finally burst out, "Come visit us, comrades from the capital in Caleras. We have a seaport, steady catches, fish in abundance, but we can't keep up with processing. If we had a skilled technologist, we could move mountains. But who will come to our backwater? We work the old way. The climate is harsh, and more people flee the settlement for comfort and warmth. I have a good solid house there. I'd give it to the right specialist. This fine, well-equipped home. I wouldn't hesitate a second. Or are we too timid to help?" At that very moment, Carmelita sat in the hall, recalling her recent deed. A restaurant, a banquet, a colleague's birthday. Everything banal, a little dull, and suddenly burning male eyes. Alberto sat alone at the next table, never taking his eyes off her. Half an hour later, they were already dancing, and then slipped quietly out of the restaurant. He took her to his rented apartment. An hour later, Carmelita called her husband to say she would be staying with a tipsy colleague overnight. Not right to abandon a woman who had misjudged her drinking. Carmelita could not understand the magic of this man. She followed him as if bound by a strong rope, unwilling to let go. She didn't want to part with him. She respected her husband, but such passion had never existed between them, not even in their youth. And now, she could no longer control herself. She was no longer young, a little older than her new companion, but she didn't care, only to be with him at any cost. The call from Caleras sealed their fate. She did not go through with a divorce, but she told her husband honestly what was happening to her. "Please don't stop me, don't try to dissuade me. It's useless. I will leave with him, whatever it costs me." Carmelita's husband grieved so deeply that he did not live long, dying of a heart attack. Carmelita had said then, "He had been broken long ago, when our son died on the submarine. He pretended to be strong, carried me so I wouldn't lose my mind from grief. But you saved me. One meeting in a restaurant, and I was ready to leave with you in a bathrobe and slippers. I regret that I unwittingly hastened his departure from this life. Call me what you will, my love, but I regret nothing." Alberto poured himself strong coffee with lemon. He put the second will back into the box. He pulled out the documents for Carmelita's apartment in Lima. His third wife had taken care of him too, in her time. After her husband's death, she had become sole owner of elite real estate in central Lima. She had drawn up the will right before his eyes. She quickly began to fall ill in Caleras. She held on with all her strength, but the doctors confirmed the climate here would soon destroy her lungs. She refused to give in, resisted all persuasion, insisting, "My love, just look around. What strange, wondrous nature we have here. My work is going so well. They've provided us free of charge with magnificent housing, By local standards, the cannery really went all out for us. I can't abandon these people now. And you're doing wonderfully with your children's literature club at the art school. We are home, my dear, right where the two of us feel so good together. Does it trouble you that I can no longer give you a child? It's too late, my red flower. Let's live for ourselves for as long as we are given. Carmelita proved to be a very brave woman. She hid the fact that she was getting worse, that it was hard to breathe and move. She left quietly in her sleep. She left him alone on such a faraway shore that even getting there had always been a trial. Since then, he had gone to the cemetery as though to work. He would tell Carmelita how his day had gone, ask her advice on what to do in this or that case. His only remaining conversation partners were the pupils in his literature club. In bad weather, they gathered in his home by the fireplace, reading things aloud, passionately discussing both profound and not-so-profound works. The youngsters stubbornly insisted that they didn't want to form their idea of world literature through Marcus and Cortázar. They had other idols, other authors. He argued that everything passes, but the classics are eternal. A second cup of coffee, then a third. The bitter hot drink no longer warmed him. His fingers and toes often froze, and from over his shoulder the lady with the scythe peered out, winking. You should take some steps regarding all your property. You're no miser to sit hunched over gold. Your death is near. Think how it should be. Don't let the love of your women and their gifts to you turn to dust. The next morning, as usual, Alberto trudged to Carmelita's grave. Soon the short summer would end. The cold would come again, when even the logs in the fireplace would no longer warm his body or soul. He noticed a new burial, diagonal from his wife's grave. He knew many in the village, who had so recently departed this world for the heavens. He read the fresh inscription, Vargas Fernanda Patricia. The newly deceased was only 40 years old. And then a thought flashed through Alberto's head like a bright comet. This is a sign. My sister's name is Fernanda too. For many years I have known nothing of her fate. Is she alive? What became of her daughter? Does my Fernanda have grandchildren? Alberto hurried home. The neighbor's boy, a computer whiz, sometimes helped Alberto look things up online. Now he would go to him urgently and ask him to dig up any information about the descendants of the Morales family. It might turn out that somewhere, at the other end of this great country, they were in need of help. If only he could be in time to find his sister, his niece, someone else from that branch of the family. How had he never thought of this before? The answer to what to do with the inheritance had been lying on the surface all along. The mailbox door stubbornly refused to yield to the new key. Christina was already starting to lose her temper. That Gustavo really is an inventor. Stuck one of his gadgets in the wrong place again? Her husband was, by education, a design engineer for agricultural machinery. But he had no intention of limiting himself to that line of work. He invented all sorts of contraptions for the home, for the family, which left Christina baffled. Gustavo's humor was dark. Their small apartment was littered with metal parts the inventor dug up who knows where, from industrial dumps. It was fortunate that their children were already grown. The older son had his own family, lived separately. Their younger daughter had enrolled in an institute in Santiago and was living in a dormitory there. Christina sighed. Their finances were tight. Her mother, Fernanda, had once endured much. Her legs had failed her at a tragically young age, just 50. For 13 years, she had been practically bedridden, a living person in the house, yet almost as if not. With their income, they could not afford a wheelchair. At first, they carried their mother outside, for some air at least. But then Gustavo's back began to give out, and there were no more outings. Now Christina herself was on the verge of turning 45, and it was painful to approach the mirror. With what money could she go to beauty salons, dress fashionably? All of her husband's earnings went toward supporting the family, covering only the bare necessities. There was no luxury. Paula in the city had no scholarship. She had once again barely scraped through her exams. Christina's meager wages, earned as a maid for several households, went entirely to her daughter. In their town, the wealthy could be counted on one hand. A housemaid was a luxury hardly anyone could afford, except perhaps for a single thorough cleaning. But Paula needed clothes, shoes, gadgets, extras to brighten her student meals. The girl must not repeat her mother's fate, always in need of everything. It was probably too late to change anything in her life with Gustavo. But Esteban, his family, Paula, they ought to live differently, not in poverty. At last, Christina managed to deal with her husband's invention. The mailbox door opened softly. Out of it protruded something like a hand. In its fingers was a letter in a large envelope. No, Gustavo would turn her into a stammerer yet. The dummy hand looked ghastly, especially with its long blue nails. What childishness! She opened the envelope and her eyes fell on unfamiliar handwriting. She glanced at the front. The return address read, Village of Caleras. As far as she knew, they had never had anyone there. She quickly figured out the source, Morales Alberto. Of course, from her mother's story, she knew of his existence. The elder brother of her mother, Fernanda. He had once abandoned her with their drunkard parents, left her to fend for herself. Figure it out, kid, and then vanished in an unknown direction. No letters, no word of himself, no visits. He even learned of their parents' deaths only years later. Christina feverishly tried to recall what her mother had last said about him. Something about how he had been in Santiago, working there after university, then moved on to Buenos Aires. After that, his trail was lost. If her brother had reappeared on her horizon, her mother would have mentioned it, that he would, in old age, end up in Caleras. No one in the Morales family could have imagined. And truth be told, they hadn't remembered their wayward uncle much at all. So why had he suddenly shown up now? Christina was burning with curiosity. The letter was addressed to Fernanda, who had already been gone for several years. Clearly, this Uncle Alberto hadn't even known of his younger sister's death. The letter read more like a confession before a priest. The long-lost relative pleaded, swore, and recounted in detail the story of his life. Reading it, Christina felt she was holding not a message to her mother, but an entire novel. At the end of the letter, Uncle Alberto wrote that he was old and frail, that he urgently wanted to find his sister in order to repay all the debts he had once owed her in life. Judging by the fact that the letter had been sent by post, this relative from Caleras didn't really know how to use email. Taking advantage of her husband's absence, Christina wrote back to Caleras. She told of the current Morales descendants, of her mother's passing and her final years, of how her uncle was too late in his wish to repay his sister's life debts. Her words held no malice, no pain. She hadn't known her uncle personally. Like her mother, she bore him no grudge. It had all long since scarred over. But Christina had been raised to respect her elders. If a man reached out and he was still family, one had to respond to such a gesture. Neither of them expected that a lively correspondence would blossom between them. Uncle Alberto quickly managed to win Christina over. She began to trust him, to share her troubles and joys. The old man gave her the same in return. Almost without noticing, Alberto had become a refuge for yet another woman, his own niece. After learning her details, Alberto requested a copy of her passport. Without hesitation, he drew up a will in Christina's name, leaving her everything his wives had once left him. A whole year passed in this soulful correspondence, this dialogue on paper. Christina wept. It was as if a piece of warmth had been suddenly torn from her soul. Some strangers, Alberto's neighbors, had written her a letter. Good day, Christina. Today we laid your uncle, Morales Alberto, to rest. Do not worry. The funeral was arranged with all due honor. Your relative, according to the doctors, had passed away about a week ago. It wasn't discovered right away. The youngsters came for their lesson, but he never opened the door. So everyone grew alarmed. Now he rests in our local cemetery beside his wife Carmelita. Such was his final wish. Many in the village knew and respected him. We'll look after his grave neighborly-like. We wish you health and long years. There was no one else to notify of the death of our fellow villager. We took the address from the stack of your letters that lay on his table. How cruel the burden of loneliness, to be buried and mourned by strangers. Christina felt a chill, a deep unease. Her uncle had sent her a single photograph, a silver-haired old man of noble bearing, surrounded by adolescents. In the background, a fireplace with 2 candlesticks, wax dripping down the sides. Above the fireplace hung a reproduction of a Diego Rivera painting. Christina hadn't been lazy. She'd looked it up online. But she never learned that this copy of the famous canvas had once been brought by Alberto and Carmelita from Lima. Alberto's third wife had always been told that she looked very much like that mysterious lady who had once inspired the famous artist. Just a month ago, Christina had received a poste restante letter containing his will, or rather, a notarized copy of it. She was shocked at how much her uncle wanted to leave her. How could she ever manage such wealth? She hid the papers away out of sight. As for Gustavo, it was as if a child had possessed him lately. He had neglected his work at the design bureau altogether. He announced that he dreamed of leaving, not just anywhere, but to a distant island, where no one and nothing would disturb him from his favorite pursuits. The only thing he forgot to clarify was on what money the family was supposed to live if he followed this dream, and what would become of Christina. She no longer mattered to him, no longer interested him. Worst of all, Christina's mother-in-law fully supported her son's illusions. She scolded Christina. "Darling, what exactly did you expect? Gustavo has already given you and the children more than 25 years of his life. And what has he received in return? Neither you, nor Esteban, nor Paula have amounted to anything. You were paupers, and paupers you remain." Christina raised her eyes to her. "But you know our situation. My mother was gravely ill for many years. We barely made ends meet. And besides, is a family's prosperity really the wife's responsibility?" Gustavo certainly was not lazy in his work, but he never sought to build a career, to rise higher in his field. The wages of a rank-and-file designer in a provincial town are meager. With his bright, talented mind, he could have found far more lucrative uses for his brains, materially speaking. And he always spent every spare peso on nonsense. Parts, fittings, spare pieces. She kept silent, always trying to understand his peculiar passion. Christina's mother-in-law smirked spitefully. "Husband and wife are one and the same. I mean that you too never rose above being a maid in your career. You should thank Gustavo that he doesn't despise you for being so useless. But my patience has run out. I'm tired of pretending that I was lucky with my daughter-in-law. No wonder Gustavo wants to run away from you to a deserted island. My boy has skilled golden hands. Haven't you heard the saying that behind every successful man, there is always a wise woman? But that is not your case at all. With you, my son had no luck." Christina wiped away a tear. So this is what her mother-in-law had thought of her all these years, silently. How fortunate that no one in the family knew how much had been bequeathed to her. Perhaps the time had indeed come to change everything in her life. She was certain of one thing. The uncle who had so recently appeared in her life would have wanted her to do exactly this. Uncle Alberto's death had coincided inexorably with the complete collapse of her marriage. Gustavo no longer chose his words with her, performing duets of reproach together with his mother. Christina recalled the joke about the bandit being scolded by the heroes. "You're sitting wrong, you're whistling wrong." That's how she now lived, constantly in the stream of verbal criticism from that duet and chorus. In her head, the outlines of a plan for the future began to form. First, she would claim her inheritance and move to Santiago to be with her daughter. She would settle in the bequeathed apartment. Christina would find work in the big city, even with a cleaning company. Clean homes and offices are always in demand. Life would be easier for Paula with her mother nearby, and then they could see what to do with the rest. Christina even had a thought about her husband. Among the properties Uncle Alberto had left her was a house in Caleras. Let Gustavo take his mother and go there. Let him invent, morning to night, his talking washing machines and ghastly mailboxes. So be it. The quarrel with Gustavo had already dragged on for an hour. They could not reach common ground. He raged, shouting, "I'm sick of it, Christina. The dreary routine, the eternal poverty, you and that ridiculous work overall from a thrift shop. Where did you even dig that up? You've stopped caring about yourself entirely." Christina gave Gustavo a critical look. Worn-out jeans, a stretched sweater collar, slippers with small holes, hair unwashed for a long time. In his hands, yet another piece of metal junk. What was that cartoon character called? The Inventor. Clearly, he'd been modeled straight off her husband. Christina didn't argue or try to prove anything. It was time to accept the truth. Their once reasonably happy marriage had reached its logical end. And the reason wasn't her overalls or his obsession with gadgets. Love had gone. It had waved goodbye and vanished into the air, leaving only bewilderment. How did we even ever marry and live together all these years? Calmly, without hysterics or recriminations, Christina went to pack her things. She would take only what was necessary. Her small savings from grocery money would be enough for a ticket to Santiago and a week's living expenses for her and Paula. She only needed to visit Esteban to tell her elder son that she had decided to change her life completely. Esteban had always been the very picture of a cut-off slice. He lived humbly with his wife's family, as he undoubtedly loved Luz dearly. He helped much around the house, was a skilled plumber, not a lawyer or a financier, but someone had to fix toilets after all. Esteban had once had a big dream, to become an architect, but they'd had no money for his studies. He hadn't done well enough on his exams to try for a state scholarship. He settled for a vocational college, and soon after, he married. Now he and Luz were raising little Miguelito. The only sadness for Christina in all this was that she rarely saw her grandson. Her in-law did not tolerate guests in her home, so Grandma Christina could only occasionally take Miguelito for a walk in his stroller in the park nearby, always under Luz's watchful eye. Christina never argued. After all, the children lived in that woman's home. Snapping her small suitcase shut, Christina returned to her husband and said, "I want to go live with Paula in Santiago. From there, I'll file for divorce. Don't argue, Gustavo. We both know this is the best solution for us. You can stay as long as you like in my mother's apartment, the one she bought after selling the family house. If you can't manage, then move in with your mother." She looked him straight in the eye and saw there the unmistakable, undisguised relief. Gustavo was glad she was leaving. He had no intention of stopping her, let alone persuading her to stay. The Rubicon had been crossed. Christina checked once more that she had taken her uncle's will and the little box with her mother's heavy gold ring. That piece of jewelry would help her pay for the notary services. She whispered to her mother in her thoughts, "You see, you were right when you gave me that one family heirloom while you were still alive. Its hour has come to save me. Bless me, dear one." The final mark of her departure was the thud of the front door and the words of yet another of her husband's contraptions. "Welcome, we are glad to see you." A mocking irony for the road. Well, at least her life would no longer be filled with that mechanical circus. When you leave, leave. Somehow it is believed that by the age of 45 to 50, a woman is completely past her prime. On the marriage market, she cannot even be called overripe, unsellable stock, suitable only for an older man or a widower. Motherhood is behind her. Rare pregnancies at that age are exceptions, not the rule. Business? One should have started young, just like with a career. Now it's all too late, unless fortune suddenly plays a trick and smiles. Christina sat in a curious little square in downtown Santiago and thought aloud, "I've claimed my inheritance and my head is spinning. I won't tell my children all the details, but how I'd love to help them now, not in some distant future. What steps should I take next? It would be wonderful to pull Esteban out of the clutches of that domineering in-law. Send him, Luz and Miguelito, to Lima or Buenos Aires, where there's excellent housing. Let them start fresh. Esteban could finally enroll in architecture school. Luz could return from maternity leave and find her own path in life. And Miguelito would have far better prospects in a big city. Paula, in Christina's opinion, had chosen far too trendy a profession: management. She studied at a branch of the Latin American University of Management. It didn't matter that she wasn't an honor student. The girl was spirited, active, clever, just a little lazy. What Christina didn't understand was this. What exactly was this managing processes and personnel, as her daughter defined management? Did that mean any processes in any field? Come along and command? She told Paula only a little about Uncle Alberto and the inheritance, and how Paula had rejoiced at the spacious Santiago apartment after the cramped dormitory. Even though it was cluttered, dusty, like a warehouse of things from the last century, Paula wandered through that kingdom with its high ceilings like a museum, delighted at every discovery. Christina kept recalling Uncle Alberto's confession about his life with Rosario. So many years had passed since then. Accustomed to doing thorough cleanings to perfection, Christina turned the old but solid apartment into a true gem in just a couple of weeks. Clean, spacious, cozy. So what if the television was an old tube model, and instead of fashionable orthopedic beds, there were sturdy, soft couches? Everywhere stood carved tables, little side tables, floor lamps with funny shades. In the kitchen, no plastic, no synthetics. Everything was finished in wood. Unusual, but not a problem. Christina joked about it. Paula, we're not princesses now, but queens outright. We've got a dowry beyond measure, enough to open an antique shop. One of my clients used to say everything in her home was antique. That's the word I remembered. Paula agreed wholeheartedly with her mother that they had been lucky with both the apartment and its furnishings. She only added that to finish with the medieval feel of the place. A few touches of modernity wouldn't hurt. On their shopping list were a decent plasma TV, a computer, a tablet, and a couple of good mobile phones. Plus household appliances, from a washing machine to a coffee maker with a blender, to live like everyone else. Christina grew pensive again. She had to decide what to do with the rest of the property. She had neither the ingenuity nor the experience. It seemed the only way was to gather all her children at the table and consult. The family meeting was set for summer vacation in Santiago. Christina's eldest son resembled her in his secrecy, his ability to keep personal matters hidden. Even now, no one in his household knew that he had submitted a drawing to a contest. Was that not irony? Esteban had been sketching quietly at night. He loved romantic portraits built on contrast, a young lady and a rogue, a nobleman and a flower seller, a socialite of aristocratic blood, and a peasant boy in a simple shirt. He could not have explained why his themes were like that. The scenes, images, and settings came to him as if from outside. The result was bold, even a little daring. For a long time he had not shown his masterpieces either to his domineering mother-in-law or to quiet Luz. He had thought of sharing them with his mother, but dismissed the idea. What did a maid know of art? When Esteban learned, during a visit to his mother, that she had inherited an actual private art gallery, he nearly lost his mind with joy. That night, after the family's first serious talk about the inheritance, while everyone else slept, he drew until morning. At dawn, he finally showed them one of his works. The reaction was explosive. The women were delighted. Even if they knew nothing about painting, even a layman could see. In the portrait of yet another man and woman, again woven from contradictions, shone the talent of a true artist. Not yet a professional, but a gifted apprentice, a self-taught beginner, and yet it looked enchanting. The decision came to Christina almost on its own. Esteban must move to Buenos Aires, devote himself there to art. All the more since the apartment of Uncle Alberto's second wife still stood empty. Christina breathed a sigh of relief. Life was falling into place. And then Paula fell in love with a boy from university. Later, Christina often recalled the saying, "No one comes into our life for nothing. Each is meant for something." Paula's friend turned out to be from Lima. He had gotten into trouble while studying in the capital and transferred to finish his degree in Santiago. The tangled ball of inheritance was unraveling smoothly, as if written out in advance. Christina, together with Paula and her boyfriend, flew to Lima, where she managed to rent out the inherited apartment for a solid amount in US dollars. Now, back in Santiago, they no longer had to pinch every peso, and Paula's fiancé turned out to have his head on straight. He courted her honestly and was preparing for marriage. So the apartment in Lima would come in handy in a couple of years, when the young couple finished university. Sometimes Christina would take out that single photo of Uncle Alberto and talk to him. "You see, dear kin, I'm slowly getting the hang of it. You wanted your inheritance to work, not to vanish without a trace. I'm trying, doing the best I can. Only thing is, I still haven't divorced my husband. Something keeps holding me back. I'm becoming sentimental." She remembered how she and Gustavo had met. Her mother's kitchen faucet had burst and he came to fix it. She remembered too how a few days later he shyly brought her a bouquet of daisies. He told her he had installed something in the faucet, a surprise. That surprise later drove her mad with exasperation. After a district-wide outage, the faucet itself informed her of the problem. "Sorry, I'm empty. Come back later." How they had laughed together afterward over that invention of his. Perhaps it was what prompted their first dates. Now I must admit, Uncle, I miss him. Who would have thought I'd ever say that? She even decided to sneak a trip back to see how he was living. She wouldn't make the first move toward reconciliation, but her heart urged her, go, find out for yourself. Christina was not one to postpone what she had resolved. She hadn't seen her husband in over a year, maintaining her pose as the wronged woman. He hadn't tried to contact her either, kept his silence like the grave. One day soon after her confession to Alberto's photograph, Christina packed up and rushed off to her hometown. She approached their house stealthily for some reason, but still managed to run into the most curious neighbor. The woman immediately spilled all the details about Gustavo. Your husband, Christina, lived here alone for a short while, then moved in with his mother. I heard from a friend that he lives next door to your mother-in-law and that he doesn't bring women around. Alone, like a wolf. And you disappeared without a word. People said all sorts of things about your family afterward. Uncertainty breeds gossip. When Christina learned that no other woman had entered Gustavo's life, her heart leapt with joy. Warm emotions swept over her, and she poured out all her news to the neighbor. How the woman congratulated her on the inheritance, asked how she had managed it, praised her for her wise choices. She invited Christina in for coffee, and right in front of her dialed the friend who lived near the mother-in-law. Bursting with excitement, she couldn't wait to share the news firsthand. The chain of embellished gossip hurried through town. Christina went back to Santiago to reflect on the news about Gustavo. But her mother-in-law already knew the latest developments. She waited impatiently for her son to come home from work. Gustavito, your time has come. Just listen to what's fallen into Christina's lap. A huge inheritance, real estate, even paintings. Esteban's managing them in Buenos Aires. Paula's off to Lima with her fiancé, and Christina herself is living in a grand apartment in Santiago. And what about you? Will you be left empty-handed? Won't you claim your slice of the rich loaf? Don't be a fool. You two never divorced. You have every right to her inheritance. Gustavo looked wearily at his mother. For God's sake, when will you stop with your demands? I'm not going to take anything from Christina, certainly not by trickery or force. Hasn't she worked enough, scrubbing other people's apartments with vacuum and mop? I should have thought about what future Esteban and Paula would have. And what happened? After our quarrel, the children wanted nothing to do with me. They sided with her. And at that time, neither I nor they knew a thing about any inheritance. I'll go to Santiago, but not to stake claims on her legacy. I want to know if it's possible that Christina and I might come together again. Live as a family. I'm even willing to give up my obsession with inventions, he thought. Christina could hardly believe her eyes or ears. They were on a family vacation in the Atacama Valley. Tomorrow, the whole group was heading out on a Jeep excursion to the salt flats. A little frightening. But really, what had she seen in her life until now? And here they were, dining in the hotel. Esteban was chatting animatedly with Paula's fiancé. Luz had taken 5-year-old Miguelito to the bathroom. Paula was discussing with her father what would be most comfortable to wear on the outing. Sweet talk, pleasant topics, a friendly atmosphere. So much they had endured to reach this day. Her difficult talk with Gustavo, her doubts, and then that fragile sprout of hope. If they tried to start over, as her husband suggested, maybe it could work. And again the thought, why was I of no use to him without the inheritance? But now I'm needed. How often people like to say you can't step into the same river twice. Christina wavered. She gave Gustavo no immediate answer to his plea for reconciliation. Instead, she invited him to live with her and Paula in Santiago for a while, to see if their family was truly finished or had a chance. Couples who have tried to rebuild their families will understand what that means. Everything was as it had been when their love first began, and at the same time, everything was different. The man and the woman now knew each other inside out, all masks long since stripped away. That they were together again now had cost effort, compromise, and the desire never again to destroy anything. This gathering in the Atacama Valley had been organized in honor of Gustavo's 50th birthday. His professional life in the distant province had unexpectedly taken a new turn. After reconciling with Christina, he had taken a leave from work. At a family council, it was decided he and his wife would travel to Caleras. Gustavo dreamed of seeing real volcanoes with his own eyes. Christina longed unbearably to visit Uncle Alberto's grave, to lay flowers there herself and mourn the past. On the spot, something unexpected happened. They both quite literally fell in love with the uncle's small, cozy house. They liked the people there too. Simple, open, unpretentious folk with nothing hidden in their sleeves. On the second day of their stay in the village, a whole delegation of neighbors came by. Some brought fish in every form, others homemade wine or berry juice. When they began to talk, it turned out that the local technical laboratory was in urgent need of a skilled designer. The institute worked on seismic problems related to volcanic activity. After the guests left, Gustavo couldn't fall asleep for a long time. Perhaps here was his true path, one that could channel his restless inventiveness. The next day, he discussed it with Christina. Her reply was simple and clear. Where you are, Gustavo, there is my home. Nothing else matters. At the restaurant where the family dined, the atmosphere was homelike and quiet. They could talk freely about their concerns without fear of prying ears. Esteban took the floor, asking for everyone's attention. I have an unusual announcement for you. In fact, two pieces of news. I exhibited my works at the gallery, and one of them was immediately wanted by a buyer. The others also drew attention. Recently, I met a renowned art expert. He told me that the paintings long considered originals at the gallery are actually very skillful copies, without much market value. The owner knew this, but always presented them as authentic, trying to attract interest to her exhibitions. Christina thought at once, poor Uncle Alberto, his second wife lived in illusions, not only about love, and he worshipped her so. How different we all are. Out loud, she said something else entirely. We should all be grateful to this woman, even for her striving to appear rather than to be. Life is such a complicated thing, weaving together past and future, connecting us with our uncle, giving us a chance to know his story. Originals or not, God will judge her. What matters far more to me is tomorrow's little trip. Before bed, Paula slipped into her mother's room, her eyes shining. Mama, soon you'll be a grandmother again. I never told you how many nerves I spent on this problem of mine. My husband and I went from doctor to doctor, but it was useless. Only one woman doctor told me to stop waiting so feverishly, and then it would happen. The term is still so tiny, just 8 weeks, but I'm so happy. Christina stroked her daughter's head anxiously. And tomorrow's Jeep excursion to the salt flats. Isn't that dangerous for you? There are salt lakes. Be careful if you decide to bathe in them. Paula smiled. I'm completely calm, Mama. I know for certain nothing threatens me. You and Papa prepared this adventure together, so of course I'll go with you. The voyage to the Atacama Salt Flats surpassed all expectations. There are places on this planet that can hardly be described in words. No definitions or epithets will suffice. The salt plains stunned Christina. She had never been a creative person, yet now images began to form in her mind. Here was a boiling hot spring. That was Rosario, Uncle Alberto's first wife. She had blazed through his life like a meteor, burned him, and failed to hold him. Afterwards, she lived for him alone, feeding herself on memories. In the distance, a churning stream of mud. All of Valentina's love, Alberto's second wife, was hidden there. Sinful, doubting by nature, she herself had destroyed her family. Black gloves, uncertainties, pain, healing her soul with art. So bright and contradictory. Pity she too could not see her happiness in the man she loved. The next stop on their walking route, a sparkling hot spring. That was fiery Carmelita, Uncle Alberto's last love, his farewell cozy haven. Resolute and unique, she had put an end to the endless chain of women in her husband's life. So faithful, so brave. How lucky he had been that she was the final chord of his love. Christina lingered at the largest salt flat, called Salar Grande. At once the thought came to her that the truest epithet for Alberto's third wife was great. Like the vast white plain stretching to the horizon, around it all was colorful, radiant. The guide explained that the hues came from mineral deposits, and indeed such had been Carmelita, following her love to the very edge of the earth. Gustavo was mesmerized by the magnificent sight of the Licancabur volcano. From afar, every slope in the crater at its peak lay visible, as if in his palm. Christina barely managed to pull her husband away. In an hour, the bus would arrive for their group. Their time in the Atacama Desert was inexorably drawing to a close. It had flown by like a single bright instant, full of impressions. Their tour program still included many points. They resolutely refused only one mysterious valley. Everyone here called it the Valley of Death. The locals said its atmosphere was strange, and many felt unwell there. Christina had no wish to shadow her life any further. Every event in life, like this amazing journey, must inevitably come to an end. From the capital to Caleras is no short distance, nearly 700 kilometers. So the younger generation decided to part ways after their father's jubilee, heading straight home from the capital. Gustavo and Christina stood in the airport's waiting hall, watching their children check in for their flights. First Paula and her husband. Christina had not yet told Gustavo that he would soon be a grandfather again. She would wait until they were home and then share the news in a calm setting. The young couple in Lima were doing well. Both were working, steadily climbing their career ladders. Thanks to Carmelita, they had their own apartment, an elite one at that. There would be room enough for a nursery. On that score, Christina and Gustavo could rest easy. Esteban and Luz went off to check their baggage, and Christina's thoughts turned to her son's talent. Yes, he never studied, never made it into that architecture institute he dreamed of, but now he lives and breathes the gallery. He paints openly, no longer hiding at night. No one offered him a fabulous sum for his painting, The Lady and the Rogue, but the price was still more than decent. He, Luz, and little Miguelito will not go hungry. They'll always have bread on the table. Christina remembered the family banquet at the hotel restaurant for Gustavo's 50th. How their children, without agreeing beforehand, had raised toasts that sounded almost the same, each saying they hoped to live as glorious a life as their parents. How good it was that they had all accepted the decision to move permanently to Caleras. No objections. They had understood at once, with their hearts. A couple of years later, when Gustavo and Christina had already settled in Caleras, they flew to help Gustavo's mother move to Santiago, into the very apartment that had once belonged to Rosario. They could not often be near the elderly woman, so let her spend her last years in comfort. Let bygones be bygones. Christina held no resentment toward her mother-in-law. The old woman had long since admitted her fault, confessing that later she realized she had been wrong to slander her daughter-in-law so harshly. On Uncle Alberto's birthday, Gustavo and Christina went to the cemetery. Earlier, Christina had found an old album at home and discovered in it a colored portrait photograph. A man of about 50, strikingly handsome, the kind women never overlook. Wise, perceptive eyes, thick wavy hair, a strong chin, beautifully shaped lips, and a dimple in his right cheek. No wonder he was born in mid-August. If astrologers are to be believed, such a Leo is always magnificent, regal, splendid in every way. While Gustavo cleared fallen leaves from Alberto's grave, Christina spoke to her uncle once more in her thoughts. "Thank you, dear one. It is not for me to judge you, nor to brand you for your sins. You changed the life of my family completely. You sought us out. You cared. You warmed me at the end with your attention. I was able, as the saying goes, to give each sister her own earring, to provide for my loved ones using the inheritance you left me. Our new family story began here in Caleras, just as once yours continued here. One day Gustavo and I too will rest here, repeating your choice, to remain faithful to this land. May the Lord grant eternal peace to your soul."
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.